Hi, well, it's Dr. Fox, licensed psychologist in the state of Texas. And in this video, we're going to talk about narcissistic fantasies. And we're going to talk about what those narcissistic fantasies are and what they often contain and why. And in this video, we're also going to touch on a little bit about the covert and overt narcissistic personality disorder subtypes. So let's get into it. Like, share, and subscribe. That would be awesome. And let's get into narcissistic fantasies. Well, criteria 2 in the DSM-5 talks about narcissistic fantasies. It talks about that these individuals are preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Now, most individuals along the narcissistic spectrum have very rich and detailed fantasies that include grandiose images of themselves and idealized others. Now, specific fantasies often include the narcissistic individual experiencing more acceptance of their fantasy, right? So they have this fantasy of acceptance, of other people accepting how unique and how great they are and things like that. They also have more positive reactions in their fantasies. So not only is there a sense of acceptance, right, where people approve of it, but there's also these positive reactions in the fantasies. Like they may achieve something very unique, and the other individuals are very awestricken and so impressed. Now, another type is that fewer fantasies that take place in the present. Now, what that means is that we see that individuals along the narcissistic spectrum, they have these fantasies, but they're often in different times, different places. They're not present. So a lot of their fantasies are used to detach from the present, and they're not as focused on what is going on around them at that time. They could be focused more on the future, or they do a lot of what ifs as opposed to what is. What if is based on some time component, typically in the future. What is where we are now. Now, the imaginings of tomorrow are more promising for the individual along the narcissistic spectrum than what's actually happening today, right? Which is, obviously, that's what I just mentioned, right? Is that, they're not very focused on the present. Is there somewhere else? And you can break down these narcissistic fantasies into two types. There's the omnipotent fantasies of being all-powerful, right? Is that they are this immense being with all this money and all this charm and all of these, significant others that are so attracted to them and all of these love affairs and all these cars and houses and all of this. And it's just this abundance, and that they have all of this power to control it, and that everyone, right, wants to be around them and be them. And it's just this sense of uniqueness and grandiose sense of self that other people are so envious of. Now, the other type is a passive fantasy of being special or chosen due to possessing exceptional talent and gifts. Now, this would be, for example, so let's say, right, that it's a music type of fantasy, very passive, and they're such a great guitar player. So let's say they're on the curb and they're just kind of jamming, and they're just jamming because that's what jamming sounds like. And so they're just jamming, and all of a sudden, this record producer walks by and is like, hey, oh my God, you're the best guitar player of all time. I need to sign you right now, and I'm going to pay you more than I've ever paid anyone in the history of the music business because you're that great, you're that special. But they didn't do anything to achieve it, right? It's just this passive fantasy of being special or chosen because of their unique talent. So if those are the types, what's the purpose of these fantasies? And that's really important too, right? Why do they have them? What are they trying to manage? Well, the purpose of these fantasies is to regulate their self-esteem. For example, so a narcissistic wound is when an individual along the narcissistic spectrum incurs some type of psychological harm, or they start to question their own sense of value or efficacy, right? What they can control and what they can influence. And this narcissistic wound internally causes them to question their worth, their value, their efficacy, right? All of these issues. And what happens is they use these fantasies in order to restore their self-esteem, to restore themselves from that narcissistic wound. So it is a recovery strategy. It is a coping strategy. It's a maladaptive coping strategy. Now, in particular, individuals along the narcissistic spectrum tend to see themselves as experiencing higher levels of daily stress, and they tend to experience two things. The first is power and revenge fantasies, in which they see themselves in a powerful position where they're able to impose punishment on those who have wronged them. And the other is a self-admiration fantasy in which they envision themselves and others admiring their unique qualities of competence, consideration, wisdom, greatness, and attractiveness. And this is all done to restore their sense of self-esteem after they've incurred that narcissistic wound. Now, it has also been found that individuals along the narcissistic spectrum have fantasies in which they're enduring victims of deprivation and pain. And this is more of a covert narcissistic style fantasy. And just to briefly cover covert and overt, overt is more of that, visible, grandiose type of narcissism that I think most people envision. But then there's also a covert type. And the covert type is that individual that says how uniquely they suffer and how much they suffer and how much pain and deprivation that they've experienced. And that can also be part of that narcissistic fantasy. Now, although pain-based fantasies do not place the individual along the narcissistic spectrum in the best of possible light, and it's important to hear that, there are going to be grandiose satisfactions and feelings of specialness associated with being the one who suffers. And that's that covert narcissistic style. It feeds that covert narcissistic style. And what's important to know, and I have a video on covert and overt narcissistic personality disorder subtypes, is that actually it's two sides of the same coin. So that individual along the narcissistic spectrum, that they can show overt and grandiose traits as well as covert traits, vulnerable traits as well. So we see them, we used to believe that they were mutually exclusive, but research has actually shown that the same individual can experience both of these types or express traits of both subtypes based upon what type of stressor that they're experiencing, what type of situation that they're in. Now, we just talked about that these are the main goals of narcissistic fantasies, right? Whether it's covert or overt. Now, they want to see and be recognized as unique and special, to the point that they are admired, revered, or attended to. Now, in treatment, it can get kind of tricky, because treatment to address these issues would include a reality-based treatment approach, and it has to be in conjunction with stress management techniques. Insight will be the most challenging, and keeping the individual in treatment long enough to benefit from the treatment is also challenging. And many individuals along the narcissistic spectrum get really frustrated because therapy takes time, particularly if we're going to treat a personality disorder. And those along narcissistic spectrum typically expect, and they feel deserving of, immediate treatment interventions that provide immediate results. And if they don't provide immediate, perfect results, then it's the provider who is inept, stupid, and useless. I hope that you found this video interesting, and please leave any comments or thoughts that you might have. Please like, share, and subscribe, and please take care. Thank you for your time and attention. Bye-bye.